This week on The Record, her dream hits a roadblock. Why Missouri rejected a nursing school graduate from getting her license. Where she could take her services unless an incoming state lawmaker can open doors for her here. How St. Louis could expand housing and shelter. And will you see the impact of the Rams settlement money anytime soon? Alderwoman Alicia Saunier is on The Record. How America voted. Political analyst Anita Mannion breaks down the election results of Decision 2024 with key insights to explain how history unfolded. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. It took us a while to count the votes, but we now know Republicans will control the White House, the Senate, and the House in the new year. Control of Congress entirely resting in Republican hands. We also know more about how we got here. So here to help us understand what happened this election cycle, 5 on your side, political analyst Anita Mannion with an analysis for The Record. Anita, good to have you back with us. We were here election night kind of going through all this, but now we have the full picture. Exit polling is in. So in your big picture overview, what did we just witness?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are things that are specific to Trump, Harris, and Biden that we can talk about in the way they ran their campaigns. But I also think there is a bigger issue. You know, if you look at one of those maps of how folks shifted either to the right or to the left, it's overwhelmingly to the right across the country. And it's not just a United States phenomenon. This is happening globally. So we've seen over the last year incumbents being defeated in country after country.
Regardless of their party.
That's right. And Germany and Canada are looking at the same thing. A lot of that is due to global inflation and the economic pressures that a lot of people are feeling.
Prices and prosecution could have come down. We saw that Republicans just turned out in higher numbers than Democrats did. And Kamala Harris actually won independents. 49 to 46, I think it was. 49 to 46, Kamala Harris won independents. But Republicans just turned out in higher numbers. Looking back, can you make the argument that the Department of Justice or prosecutors in New York or elsewhere coming after Donald Trump excited his base?
Yeah, definitely. You know, Trump has always wanted to be in the position, he likes being in that position of being like the oppressed and fighting back, right? And so I think his prosecutions did that, the assassination attempt did that. We saw him fundraise a lot after each of those incidents. But I think you would also make the argument if those prosecutions had started a couple years earlier, and then you actually had convictions and sentencing, then the opposite could have happened. Yeah,
where did Trump go right? There's a lot to look at there. Where did the Democrats go wrong? What do you make now? Obviously, hindsight being 2020, but looking back at Joe Biden, there were some warning signs. In 2021, 3 years ago, stadiums full of men, and I'm highlighting men because of the exit polling showing that Donald Trump won men in the white men, he won them, let's see here, 60 to 37. White men went for Trump. Latino men, 55 to 43. And with black men, 77-21 for Harris, but he improved significantly there. Stadiums full of men in 2021 were chanting their disapproval of Joe Biden, to put it politely. And all the DNC did with that is to take the humiliating feedback on a very public scale and spin it into a meme of Dark Brandon with lasers shooting out of his eyes. If you don't know that story, maybe you're not online very much. But was that a missed opportunity for the vice president to take a hard look internally at his standing with the American public?
Yeah, when Joe Biden ran in 2020, he didn't overtly say, I will only run for one term, but he certainly gave that impression that he was going to be a transition president, he was going to defeat Trump, and then step aside was the impression that I think most people had. But I think once Trump declared, Joe Biden dug in because in his mind, he was the one who could defeat Trump and really did not give up that ghost until there was large and public pressure after that really bad debate performance.
If Trump's trials energized his base, do we have any idea what depressed the Democratic engine? Because the Democratic engines in big urban city centers sputtered. They didn't turn out as high as we've seen them do in elections past. And that definitely dragged Kamala Harris's prospects.
Absolutely. When we look at the biggest counties that Democrats won last cycle, Kamala Harris was down over 1 million votes in those. And the biggest counties the Republicans won, Donald Trump was up over 1 million votes in those. I think that part of the issue is when it comes to both the media landscape and their turnout strategies. You know, on one hand, Kamala Harris had a much larger ground game. It was better funded. She had more people working. but where Trump sort of outsourced his to Elon Musk and other third-party groups. But their sort of non-traditional approach and maybe offering $1 million a day seemed to help them with their turnout. And they also did less traditional media. Trump didn't do the 60 Minutes interview, but they went on the Joe Rogan podcast and these other sort of in the manosphere and seemed to really connect with those voters and energize them in a way that the Democrats didn't.
We often break down exit polling based on race, gender, demographics like that, but there's also the economic splits. People who felt that the economy wasn't working for them or that the economy wasn't working well at all, they voted heavily in favor of Donald Trump. And people who make north of $100,000 a year voted heavily in favor of Kamala Harris. The same breakdown was true among educated college graduates voting for Kamala Harris and people that didn't go to college voting for Donald Trump. What does that tell? I mean, that's one of the sharpest divides that you see in all the exit polling is education and income. What does that tell you about the way people understand prices in the economy and the way that influences their vote?
I think that the economy and those economic pressures of inflation, if you are living paycheck to paycheck, if your budget is really tight, then milk going up $1.50 and other things going up really affects you. Whereas if you have more squishiness in your budget, if you have a mortgage where the rate is already fixed, your mortgage didn't change. If you're a renter, your rent has probably skyrocketed over the last 4 years. So those pressures are really felt more by people in those lower education and income stratuses.
Some progressives might argue that the Democratic turnout was depressed because of the Israel-Gaza policy. Maybe that was true in Dearborn. I don't know if I buy it across the board because in Democratic primaries, Democrats were electing moderate voices who weren't so critical. I mean, we saw that in St. Louis. But I want to shift now to the impact of the Trump administration because we saw 6 of the top 10 Google search trends in the week after the election, including President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks. People really want to know what this is going to mean for them. After Trump tapped controversial House Republican Matt Gaetz to lead the Department of Justice, Google search trends documented a surge of people asking, can I change my vote? Well, no, you can't, but the people we elected in the Senate might still have some impact over that. Where are we going in this transition phase, and how real is this buyer's remorse question?
You know, it reminds me of the Brexit vote when the biggest Google search afterwards was, what is Brexit? What does this mean? I think in a lot of ways, the vote for Trump was a protest vote. Like, something's got to change. This system isn't working for me. And now that we're seeing the reality of folks who might be in the cabinet, policies that might take place, people might be having second thoughts.
Anita Manning, thanks so much for joining us.
So glad to be here.
Some city leaders want to speed up the process on spending the city's share of RAM settlement money. Why other leaders might be against that idea next. The corruption trial of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan continuing this week. On the stand, star government witness Fidel Marquez. Attorneys for former Speaker Madigan and his co-defendant attempted to undermine the credibility of the Commonwealth Edison executive turned FBI mole. That case still ongoing. And a new incoming Missouri House Democrat, Ray Reed, wants to relax state licensing laws to allow the Board of Nursing to license DACA recipients. Alondra Orozco, you see her here, graduated from the St. Charles Community College recently, the nursing school there. And it was only once she went to go sit for board exams that she learned the state would refuse to license her because of her immigration status. She moved to Missouri when she was just 5 years old. She is legally allowed to work in the U.S. Illinois quickly processed her license, so she's looking for work there across state lines. Right now, City Hall is splitting largely into 2 camps on how to spend the Rams settlement money. Some people want to save it and open that funding spigot just for a slow, steady drip when the city needs it at occasional times. Others want to spend it now in a big splash. This week, Alderwoman Pam Boyd partnered with Greater St. Louis Inc. and big businesses in the city to introduce a plan to spend part of that Rams settlement money now. At least 3 other aldermen say they back that idea, but Board President Megan Green calls the idea premature.
The Board of Aldermen has been clear from the very beginning that having a robust public engagement process for the RAM settlement funds is of the utmost importance.
They told me to tell you that they're sick of surveys and they're ready to see some work.
The plan would spend $100 million on infrastructure, housing, and building upgrades downtown, and another $130 million into neighborhoods in North and Southeast St. Louis, with $70 million or so left over. When we come back, one alderwoman who represents that part of town. Welcome back. City Hall was abuzz this week with a lot of work happening after this November election. Now local elections are just around the corner. Joining us now is Alderwoman Alicia Saunier from the 7th Ward in Central South City, I guess you could say.
South City, Central South City.
Good to have you back with us. You're in the 7th Ward. That's an odd number. That means you're up for re-election in the spring, your first time facing re-election.
Correct.
After winning that seat. You also just brought a new revised bill to the Board of Aldermen that would expand housing shelter, and if I understand correctly, make it easier for existing homeless centers to expand their current facilities. Quite a journey you've had getting to this point.
It's been a long journey. It's been a very public journey, a journey of about a year. It's been a lot of lessons learned for me as a legislator, especially as someone who was, newer to it. And so this bill that's in front of us, Board Bill 114, that was perfected last week 10-5, and hopefully will be third and final passage this Friday, is essentially, making an argument that housing is a human right and it should be reflected in our zoning codes. And if that's the case, then we should allow for the various types of housing needs that we know that our city has, and it's on a conditional basis with the requirement of an operational plan, and then also has some density language so that we don't over-concentrate them. And this bill is just about zoning, so it does not touch the plat and petition process.
So if you live in the city of St. Louis and there's a homeless housing shelter somewhere near you, they might expand if they have plans to do that, but they have to go through a number of checks. They have to check a number of boxes in order to do that.
So the expansion right now, the language you see in this inspection is just protecting them so that if you want to expand in an area where you've already done your plat and petitioning, you don't have to go through this process because you've already gotten that feedback.
Are there those centers that have been trying to expand who could not?
The larger point of the bill is really the fact that a lot of the facilities are not allowed. So this is not just shelters, transitional housing, group homes, boarding homes. These things are NA on most of our zoning code or limited in much later areas. So what this bill does is rather than these facilities starting at the appeals process through the Board of Adjustment, they will now go through a conditional use hearing process, given that they're successful in getting their signatures and submitting their operational plans.
Similar to the liquor licensing.
Correct.
Yeah, there was a question at one point about is the city giving preference to selling liquor over housing people in need?
And I would argue that in some ways we still do. I mean, it's very different. So with the liquor license, they have a completely alternate path. With that, if you're a restaurant, you don't have to do plat and petition at all. You can get a temporary license for 90 days. This bill doesn't propose anything like that. You still have to go through the plat and petition process. And, we request things like an operational plan and things like that. But some of those differences are needed because these are facilities for, very vulnerable people in neighborhoods and communities. And so in some ways, it should be, more thoroughly vetted, and we should get more specific information.
Greater St. Louis, Inc., a group of big businesses in the city, and 4 of your colleagues in the Board of Aldermen brought forward a plan this week to spend the Rams money now, most of it. It would leave about $70 million unspent for the time being, but it would take the rest of that, about $230 million, I think, and split it, 56% going into the poorest neighborhoods in St. Louis, including your ward, and 44% going downtown. I imagine in an election year, when people want to see improvements, that would be hard to vote against.
Well, so I've had the pleasure of serving as the chair of Committee of the Whole, which has walked through all of the ideas that were submitted in the portal, and the portal that got over 16,000 City of St. Louis residents to participate and give their ideas. One of the things that's not true is that there's no guarantee of which neighborhoods it will go through. The legislation actually just broadly says disinvested neighborhoods, and it does not define what that looks like or what that is.
Well, the SLDC's map, the Economic Justice Index, which shows it ranks 1 and 2. If you look at the yellow and green parts of that map, a lot of that is in your ward.
But that's not defined in the bill.
Not
in
yet.
The legislation that was brought forward, that was filed at the board, it does not specifically make any references to the economic justice plan. It just very broadly uses the term disinvested neighborhoods. So I would be interested in a bill sponsor of Greater St. Louis really defining what that means and what that looks like. And some of my other thoughts on the bill, again, when we've been going through this RAM settlement process, we've gotten to hear what a lot of the concerns are of the entire city. And certainly infrastructure is at the top of everybody's mind, but that does include things like our water division, our water department. We've heard a lot of people advocating and talking about the need for us to make sure we don't run into where many other cities have across the country. We've had a lot of conversations about investing in early childhood. We have that hearing coming up. They haven't even gotten to fully make their case for how they'd like to see. We've had people come and present to us and talk to us just about a plethora of ideas, including the city's workforce, right? Which I know is at the top of a lot of City of St. Louis residents, is that my services are not running as efficiently. A lot of the folks who you see that that voted against Board Bill 114 have said, well, I can't do it because we don't have the staff to trust it. And so my thoughts on the current bill that's in front of us is I think, number one, for a corporate private entity to be leading a ask and not bringing up any matching funds, I have a lot of questions about that. If we're going to have a private-public partnership, then it's got to be a partnership, and it can't be the public dollars that are the only ones on the table. And I would like to see more specific definition of what disinvested neighborhoods is. And I would like to see something that broadly addresses the many desires that have been lifted up through the process.
It's an interesting question because as currently drafted, for example, Alderman Tom Oldenburg, he's supporting this bill, though it would give not 1 cent to his ward, not 1 penny. Now, you could say if downtown is better and there's more attraction, there's more business downtown, maybe it helps the whole city, and that's a benefit. Alderman Joe Vollmer's ward wouldn't get a penny. Alderman Brett Narayan's ward wouldn't get a penny. I don't know that you're going to get a better deal than that. A lot of the money focused in wards like yours, how would that seems like, let me ask you the question this way. If the money was earmarked to go towards those economically disaffected areas, and there were projects, are there projects right now, infrastructure projects that you could look at in your ward and say, hey, we could put the money here?
There are projects, infrastructure projects, but I do have to go back to the portal. The 7th ward that I represent, the idea that they most strongly supported was actually early childhood education and things around public transit inspection and things around like water and infrastructure. So again, infrastructure is such a bold claim in a piece of legislation. We need to walk that out and figure out what that looks like, because what we saw in the portal is not necessarily aligned with what is in the bill. And I would say for me, as someone who serves the city and has to work through our processes, I certainly want to see some of our city workers get some support. I think that's really important. They didn't get a raise this past year because of the earnings tax being cut, but most of them are accomplished to that raise. And there's no department in the city of St. Louis that's going to tell you that they have adequate staff to do what they need. And so I think that there has to be a way to use this once in a generation money and figure out how can we use this to fix our problems long term. Because another problem with infrastructure is that we don't have any maintenance in the city of St. Louis. So you can allocate millions of dollars and do this project once, but who's going to come back and keep that money going? And right now what you see is community improvement districts and special business districts, which actually additionally tax the residents to cover that need. But we can use this money in a proactive way that I think can address the many concerns and many ideas in that portal and honors what the Board of Aldermen has committed to and is specific in where that money goes and potentially prevent problems not just one time with the funds, but long term.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're back in a moment. Special Counsel Jack Smith plans to resign and drop the federal felony indictments against the president-elect in cases pertaining to stealing and withholding top-secret classified intel and conspiring to overthrow the peaceful transfer of power in 2021. And yet, in 64 days, a convicted felon will still move into the White House. Donald Trump's felony convictions in New York State still stand for now. His lawyers will try to persuade a judge there to throw those charges out, perhaps vacate sentencing or transfer the case to federal court. What happens next there? No one knows. That chapter of history hasn't been written yet, but let's check the record. It was 51 years ago today an American president uttered 5 words that would ultimately define his legacy. The phrase, now something of an ironic punchline. At the time, Richard Nixon was fighting in court to keep the damning truth about America's acts in Vietnam from the public eye. He had conspired against the press, illegally spied on reporters, targeted journalists in federal investigations, and compiled some of their names on an enemies list. All of those actions pointing toward a more central motive, that a politician understands the way things seem can often be just as, if not more important than the way things are. That's why Richard Nixon was so obsessed with the way the public perceived him, and likely why he felt compelled to say this.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Those words, well, I'm not a crook, would echo around Nixon's legacy in the pages of history. Nixon was reeling, grasping for control of the narrative after those damning details about his posh lifestyle were starting to become part of the record. 6 months later, Nixon announced he would pay back more than $400,000 in back taxes after listing expenses on an ice maker, a heater for a swimming pool, club chairs, a sofa, and other pillows under the category of protection. Bernstein and Woodward would write in their book, All the President's Men, that the investigations into the president made him into a, quote, prisoner in his own house, secretive, distrustful, combative, and sleepless. Of course, those investigations were led by Democrats who controlled Congress at the time, and there's right now little reason to believe a GOP-led Congress would have any kind of appetite to investigate the incoming president in their own party. Now, this time next week, we might know a bit more about what potential criminal consequences our incoming president might face in his home state in court. We'll see you at the same time next week. Until then, we're off the record.